And welcome back to another episode of Psychic Evolution.
And this is the podcast where you discover the psychic potential within to empower yourself and manifest your psychic and mediumship gifts. And today we are so honored to bring a guest, Mark Anthony. JD Psychic Explorer, used to be the psychic lawyer, probably still is the psychic lawyer. And he is a fourth generation psychic. So think about this, guys. 4 generations of psychic mediums coming down the line, and he does have this gift and he communicates with spirit. He's also an Oxford-educated lawyer, a licensed attorney to practice law in Florida, Washington, D.C., and also the United States Supreme Court. So very well accomplished. Mark also travels to mystical locations in remote corners of the world to examine ancient mysteries and supernatural phenomena. And oh my gosh, so Mark has so many awards already, and probably many more to follow for his new book, The Afterlife Frequency, the scientific proof of spiritual contact and how that awareness will change your life. And that has also been considered for a Pulitzer Prize. So this is the rave right now in the spiritual communities. This book is rocking and rolling, and definitely we'll have a link in the show notes to Mark's website and also for his book. So welcome to our show, Mark. It is an honor to have you.
Thank you, Maggie. I really appreciate that. And thank you, Jamie. It's good to see you again.
Definitely.
And for the listeners, Jamie and I know each other. We've known each other from conferences and some other work. And it is just such an honor to be on your show. Thank you both for having me.
Thanks for coming to have fun with us. You know, if we can share these experiences and give people some information to think about, to go, okay, you know, and sometimes it's, I've heard that crap 1,000 times, but click, that's the first time I kind of see it that way. And if we can help them to help themselves, this is a great thing. And with this, as you and I are on one of the specialty teams at the University of Arizona with Gary and Rhonda Schwartz, that we're working on the technology of the soul phone, we're bringing that quantum physics and spirituality, bringing it to spiritual physics. You growing up in a home that they all use their abilities, I've got the same experience. You and I have a lot of similarities. How did that allow you to thrive with your abilities? And when were you activated? When did you start using your abilities?
I first noticed them, well, I didn't know what they were because I was 3.5, and I started playing with my invisible friends and interacting with them, which is not an unusual thing for a toddler, but when mommy and daddy can see who I'm talking to. And I remember the reactions were very different. Mom's reaction was, oh, he's got it. And dad's was, oh, geez, he's got it.
That's balance.
Yeah, it was definite balance. And then when I was, just after I turned 4, I had a near-death experience. And I write about that extensively in the Afterlife Frequency. And I went into cardiopulmonary failure in an ambulance, and it was really quite intense. And so by the time I started first grade, I was 5 years old. And my father sat me down and said, Mark, do not talk to anyone about this. Because he goes, you can talk to your mother and I about this all you want. And what he said, Jamie and Maggie, he said, people who see things other people don't get taken away. And that terrified me. Yeah. And he saw how scared I was. And, you know, my dad had been a Navy SEAL. He was a aerospace engineer. My mother was a commercial artist. It's not like they were running around, you know, wearing turbans and flinging granola and, you know, waving Ouija boards at people. I mean, we were the sort of all-American family next door. And he saw I was really scared. And my dad he hugged me and he said, I'm not trying to scare you. And if you'll indulge me just for a minute, I found out later in life why he said people get taken away. My dad had 4 siblings, 3 sisters and a brother. And one of his sisters, Marjorie, was a very gifted psychic medium, as was their mother, Isabel, and their maternal grandmother, Grace. So Dad's family was loaded with psychics. Mom's is a whole other story with them. But what happened, Marjorie, and I never met Margie, not in this world. I never met my Aunt Marjorie because all these events happened about 20 years before I was born, because my parents had me when they were older. I wasn't the planned child. I was the surprise, like, oh God, aren't we getting too old for
Just
this?
like life. Yep.
Yeah. So Margie unfortunately married this religious fanatic. He was an evangelical, and he looked at her abilities as evil, and he was afraid of them. He was a machinist at a steel plant in Harrison, Pennsylvania, and one day he's getting ready to go to work, and Marjorie said, I have a terrible feeling. And she was holding her stomach, and she was doubling over in pain. She goes, something horrible is going to happen. You can't go to work. They had a big fight, and she started crying. And anyway, he goes, all right, fine, I'll stay home. You and that voodoo stuff of yours. And well, that day, a crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams, and the cable snapped, and they fell, and they crushed the machine shop that he worked in and killed everybody in it. Wow. So,
and had he not listened,
he would have been there, which I'm sorry, but it may not have been such a bad thing, and I don't mean to sound unkind, but he should have been grateful. Instead, it intensified his fear that Satan was in league with her. He got an unscrupulous psychiatrist to diagnose Marjorie as a paranoid schizophrenic with delusions. She was forcibly removed from her home in a straitjacket, taken to a mental institution, and forcibly subjected to electroshock therapy over a period of 6 months. And it damaged her brain so badly that she never talked about seeing spirits again. And my dad said Marge was just vivacious and bubbly, and after that, she was withdrawn, and she was a shadow of her own self. And as I got older and I finally got my parents to tell me what had happened, then I understood why they were like, don't talk about this to anybody but us.
Yeah. And back then, people didn't understand it. You know, and what's interesting is with those circumstances, of course, I always say, you know, there's that fine line between what we do and the insane asylum. There are some sane people that just don't understand what they're doing. I'm hearing voices. I'm like, man, I hear it all day long, and people seek me out. They don't fear me. It's if you're comfortable, it will bring comfort to others. And in doing that, did that allow your dad to see things differently after she was diagnosed? Did it allow him to kind of, okay, I got someone to back me in some way to share something differently? How did that work? Do you know?
Well, my mother wanted nothing to do with Marjorie's husband ever again, because my mom's side of the family, see, my dad's family, they were very prominent, very conservative, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Baptists from Pennsylvania. They were Northern Baptists, which are very different than Southern Baptists.
Okay.
But, you know, no, they are. This is what I understand. Meanwhile, my mom's family comes from Italy, and they're New York, New Jersey. And my maternal great-grandmother, my mother's grandmother, Giovanna, was known in Little Italy and North Jersey as the woman who knows things. In fact, in 2016, PBS did a special called The Italian Americans, and it was a two-night, 2 hours each night special. They actually did an entire segment on Giovanna and her metaphysical abilities. And it was so cool because on every commercial, one of my cousins would be calling me, oh my God, did you see that? And I'm calling them, and we're texting and everything. And so it was really great that it was documented. And Giovanna lived well into her 90s, and officials from the Catholic Church used to come and talk to her for her advice on things. And she and my mom were very, very close. And then my mom was the whole bag of tricks. I mean, she was a medium. She had precognitive. In other words, she could see future events. So I grew up in this household where, our dinner conversations were pretty bizarre. It'd be,
to other people.
Yeah, to other people. To me, we'd be talking about St. Anthony and Gandhi and, hey, pass the meatballs. And Mom
By
would be
the
like,
way,
hey, I saw a dead person today. And Dad's like, where the hell is the screwdriver? I'm looking for the Phillips head. And so this was kind of the environment that I grew up in. And then as I was interacting with other kids, I realized I never met a family like mine. And so I thought it was cool. I mean,
could you fit into life? Could you fit into those connections?
Well, yeah, and I was always fortunate because I seemed to get along with everybody. I went to a high school where like I live on the barrier island, and so we were the beach people, and then there were the people that lived on the mainland, and there was the huge, I'm just going to call them, they by their self-admission, they're rednecks. And then there was the African American community, but everybody liked me. I kind of got along with everybody, but everybody thought this guy's a little odd. But I was a good student, so they kind of cut me some slack there. So I learned that you don't go around just flinging readings at people. You keep it to yourself.
Yep, you beautifully said. And I think that brings up a very interesting point. As I always say, I don't mean to be rude, but prior to a reading, I don't want to know anything about the person. It becomes more validating, right? When I'm Joe Schmo and I don't know things yet, we might know things. And I always say, depending on the modality we're using, if it's mediumship, your people get the credit. If it's psychic, you get the credit. All I'm doing is reading mental thoughts of information and vibration, all that kind of good stuff. Question everything, be skeptical, just be open. And I think in talking...
Exactly. Be open, collect the information, and don't be so quick to go to no. Something will come through and people go, no, no, no. I had a great example of this. I was doing a reading for this woman. It was a telephone reading, and her mother's spirit came through and started talking about a 7-year-old boy connected to her who's in this world, and that he has a problem with his eyes and he needs to go to the eye doctor. And my client said, well, I don't have a son, but my sister has a 7-year-old boy, and we're all very close, and he's complaining about his eyes. I said, well, you got to get him to the eye doctor. And I said, and now your mother's giving me a song. And I start singing, Tutti Frutti, aw Rudy, Tutti Frutti. And I get in like Little Richard, Tutti Frutti, aw Rudy. and she's like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. She goes, I know who Little Richard is, but, it's not like we're fans. I go, okay. All right, so 2 weeks later, I get an email. She goes, Mark, you're not going to believe this. I called my sister, told her that. She said, let's get him into the eye doctor. We made an appointment. So my sister, my nephew, and I, and the second we walk into the doctor's office, on the radio, it starts playing Tutti Frutti, Aw Rudy by Little Richard. Now, it's great when stuff like that happens, but looking at it, and the reason I brought that up, Jamie, because I know you want to talk about the science. I have a theory that our soul is pure electromagnetic energy. That's why I call it the electromagnetic soul, the EMS. And radio waves are also in the electromagnetic spectrum. And according to Einstein's theory of relativity, on the subatomic level, you go from molecules to atoms to electrons, protons, and neutrons to the smaller particle, which is a quantum. On the quantum electromagnetic level, since from Einstein all the way up to today, we're talking like Max Tegmark, Stephen Hawking, all the very prominent physicists, said that time doesn't exist. In other words, what you and I consider to be the future or the past, they're able to perceive. So when I started thinking about that reading, I realized now I know what was happening. As a spirit, they can scan our body. They find electromagnetic anomalies within our bodies. In other words, she knew that her grandson was having astigmatism and needed to get checked. And to guarantee that they were doing the right thing, she was able to see the precise song, the precise moment they walked into the office. So when for the benefit of the audience, when Jamie and I do a reading for you and we get stuff like that and it comes true, it's great, but there's much more to it than just, wow, isn't that great? That was the song that came through. What we're seeing is quantum physics and spirituality in action.
Yes, and spiritual physics, the unification, because I think like you do, as you know, we got to be able to fit this spiritual stuff into our life or we start feeling like a nut job, man. And so, right, when we can question things and then have those firsthand experiences, that's real. Secondhand's lovely, but firsthand is solid. And, like I do, to have the blind faith to be able to say that, because it's like we better be freaking right, otherwise I'm not going to just throw cheesy words out there. And when you can get personalities and characteristics, it moves beyond good guesswork to, maybe there's something to it, because out of billions of people, not everyone has the same personality or characteristics. I'm like, yeah, exactly.
Exactly. There's the 4 assumed dialogues. And I remember when I was studying mediumship in England, one of the instructors, he's he was such a trip. I was the only American in the program, so we're sitting there. There's like 40 of us, and he said, "We're going to avoid the four assumed dialogues. Number 1, they are with you. Number 2, they love you. Number 3, they bring you joy. Number 4, they bring you upliftment." And then he looks right at me and he goes, "Oh, you Americans." He goes, "When all else fails, do pull out a Native American spirit." Said, "Well, there'll be no Pocahontas or Hiawatha in this class." And I didn't know if I should be mortified or crack up laughing. And I'm having like, isn't he like Professor Snape from Harry Potter?
Right.
It was like,
Saying that?
I know I was having like this whole Harry Potter alternate universe thing. But his point is very well taken, because anybody can say, oh, now who died? Your grandmother? Oh, yeah, she's around you. She loves you. She brings you joy. She brings you upliftment. Well, first off, people do need to hear that. And generally, that's one of the things a spirit wants you to know. I mean, they want you to know those things. But then, like Jamie, you just said, it is the facts, the evidence, the things that I couldn't possibly, or you couldn't possibly know. The other day I was doing a reading for a woman, and her husband's spirit comes through, and he says to me, "Igloo." And I'm like, "Igloo? I live in Florida. It's not like we talk about igloos, you know." I'm like,
Say
"Igloo." I'm like, "Igloo." She goes, "Oh my God." I'm like, "Okay, that's always a good sign." You know, when you're a medium and you say something like igloo and the client starts, "Oh my Godding," she goes, "I think I know what this is." I go, "Okay, I'll go ahead." She said, "Well, our daughter is in Alaska and she's getting married there. And she called me on the phone yesterday and told me that her wedding planner used to live in an igloo." She goes, "Mark, I think that's it." And I'm like, "Gee, yeah, me too." You know, and so we were laughing about that. But now let's examine this logically. Her husband came through to let her know that he is around her and he is around their daughter. He loves her, wants to bring her joy, wants to bring her upliftment. But then he takes a much more detailed term and brings up igloo. Now, first off, I didn't know this lady. This was a phone reading. Secondly, I didn't know her. I had no idea her daughter was in Alaska. And B, that her daughter in Alaska has a wedding planner that used to live in an igloo. Now, I think we're way past 1,000,000 to 1 there.
So oddball
Okay.
and random, yet
Yeah.
accurate to go, holy
Yeah.
crap, there's no way you could know that. Except we know it. Yes.
Except we know it. Or rather, we are the conduit for the information that the spirit knows. And there were, the reason that the term medium has stuck, in the Victorian era, they used to refer to us as sensitives, which in a way is almost more accurate because we're very sensitive to frequency and to vibration. And medium means we are the medium that it comes through. Like a radio is the medium that radio waves come through. A computer is the medium that internet messages come through. And so that became a term in favor of sensitives. And with sensitivity, let me ask you this, Jamie, and I think I already know. Okay, we're guys, and we're supposed to be guys and not express our emotions, but would you describe yourself as a sensitive man?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Are you also sensitive to ambient things like temperature, sound,
Yep.
lights? Yeah. When people are always trying to drag me to nightclubs, "Oh, you'll love it. The music's really loud and the lights." It's like, love it. Why don't you just light me on fire? I mean, it's torture. It is torture for me to go these. It's like even when I was in college and all that. I remember when I was in Germany. Everyone wanted to go to the techno, but their beer gardens I loved. Low lighting. It's outside. You can sip a beer, have a conversation. But then they'd want to go to Dieter's dance party with the lights and oh God, I thought I was gonna, but I'm making jokes about that. But the thing is, the reason that we're mediums is because we're sensitive to frequency.
Yep.
Everybody is. It's
Tune
just
in.
that we are hypersensitive to it. And unfortunately or fortunately, the sensitivity also applies to our emotions, but that's also what makes us able to receive an energetic transfer from a spirit that contains emotional messages to convey to the client.
Yes. And it's that kind of just the facts and information. And when that person, the sitter, the person, the client that you're reading for, can bring their own comfort, when they can realize that you're talking to their loved one to go, that's exactly how they would be. I'm like, oh, that's exactly how they still are. And when they can feel that confidence and comfort, I love for people to make their own connections with their loved ones. Because I think, like I do, I am honored to be of service, but people don't need us. They can do it directly. It becomes more validating when we are Joe Schmo and we don't know things, yet those offhand and oddball little validations to go, that was so random and oddball, yet freaking accurate, to go, holy cow. And I love when people click for themselves to go, this is real. I'm like, perfect, good, question everything and keep going. And when they can be comfortable, yes,
it is good. It's very good that people can make connections on their own, but the problem there becomes, is it really the spirit, or is this my imagination or wishful thinking?
Yep.
And I'm not negating or in any way denigrating somebody who is not necessarily a medium but is receiving mediumistic impressions. In fact, in my book, The Afterlife Frequency, I introduced the RAFT technique, how to recognize, accept, feel, and trust messages from spirits, because everyone is capable of having a mediumistic and or psychic experience, provided we know how to recognize, accept, feel, and trust the messages. Because people say, well, everyone can be a medium. It's like, well, everyone can swim, but not everyone's going to be Michael Phelps. Everybody can play guitar, but not everyone's going to be Slash or Jimmy Page. Everybody can do math, but not everyone's going to be a Max Tegmark or a Niels Bohr or a Max Planck. I didn't say Albert Einstein because he was bad at math because he was slightly dyslexic. He used to have a team of mathematicians there, and he would say, write this down to this and this, and they would do the calculations. But what it was, he was getting the abstract, esoteric concepts. And so the mathematicians were doing that work. I mean, he could do math, but he would occasionally make these errors. And the thing is, even Einstein wasn't perfect at everything. I mean, you ever seen pictures of him? I mean, the guy, his hair was a mess. They said he would never comb his shoes. He could barely tie his tie. In fact, when he was a child, until he was about 5 years old, they thought he was retarded because he couldn't tie his shoes. He couldn't tell time on a clock. It's because he was slightly dyslexic, but then they turn around and start talking to him and go, there is nothing mentally impaired about this child. Right. So the thing is, we're all different. We can all have these experiences. People like Jamie and I are very good at this, all right, but don't expect me to become an Olympic swimmer. Yeah, I can slosh around in a pool, but I'm not going to win any medals in the Olympics.
And it's, do you even want to do that?
No.
That's the thing. Yeah, exactly. And so I'm like, yes, everyone's got the ability. It's, do you want to use it, and what level do you want to take it to? And when people can feel more comfortable to go, oh, this is natural. I'm like, I always say, this is so natural, it's supernatural. That's the point. And when they can be comfortable and make those connections, they begin to live life more than just exist and survive.
Do you consciously work with electromagnetic frequencies to help when you're doing readings or to prepare yourself for readings? Is it a conscious thing that you explore, or do you just recognize it when it shows up with the examples in the mediumship?
In all the interviews that I've done, and I'd say we're easily over 1,000, that is one of the most unique questions I have ever been asked. Wow, Maggie, I'm honored. Yes and no. What happens is, the funny thing is I'm on camera a lot, like we are, Jamie. and when I've been on TV, and I'm filmed a lot when I'm doing this. And when I watch the physical sensations that I go through, and I didn't realize it until I started watching films. With spirit communication, I think an experienced medium defines the parameters of the contact. An inexperienced medium, oh, they come to me all the time. Well, you don't leave the doors and windows of your house open 24/7. So you don't want to be bombarded. Look, I got stuff I got to do other than the spiritual. I got a house. I was out fixing a sprinkler head the other day. I'm sunburned from, being out there doing stuff. And, occasionally I have to go to Walmart. It's funny. Like someone will see me at Walmart. What are you doing? Mark Anthony, what are you doing here? So, well, I've got to be somewhere.
Beautiful.
But the thing is, when you define the parameters of the contact, and there's a group of spirits that work with us, there are guides. We have a main spirit guide. You can call it a guardian angel or whatever label you wish to attach. And then you have other spirits that work with you. And when you let them know that I'm now doing this, the way I let everyone in spirit know is I start all of my sessions with a prayer. And when I do that prayer, that's kind of, I'm shooting a flare up into the cosmos saying, this is what I'm doing. Now, that kicks in my sensitivity to the electromagnetic, because I've noticed, and people kind of like, yeah, you do this thing, I can literally feel spiritual energy interphasing with my neural network, and I get these tingles and chills for a second. So what's happening there is the electromagnetic energy, the EMS, the electromagnetic souls that are spirits, their energy field is interfacing with mine, and then you get the cold chills and tingles and that physiological response. So that's what happens with me. But I want to take this a step further. This is also why a lot of people think spirit communication is scary, because when they encounter a spirit, they get cold chills and tingles. It's not that the spirit's trying to scare you. It's that is the physiological response when our central nervous system, which operates on electromagnetic impulses, interfaces with another electromagnetic field, and the physical sensations are cold chills and tingles, which is also the same physiological sensation that happens in the fight or flight response. Yep. So when you really are scared because there's a gang of thugs or a tiger or a rabid dog running at you, and you get those cold chills and tingles, and it's, fight or flight. So people immediately assume, because they have that sensation, that, oh, this must be evil. And so that's part of what I'm trying to teach people, is that there's no reason to be afraid of spirits. It's like being afraid of the sky because it's blue or the grass because it's green. It simply is. They're there. And some of us are able to perceive it more clearly than others.
Yeah.
I always used to have chills when I would connect with spirits as a kid, and it partly would scare me, but I knew it was like a connection. And then as I got older, it continues to happen, like just as you say, you're like, you get chills or you get the goosebumps everywhere, and you're like, oh my God, there it is. I always get tears in my eyes too. Like that's another effect that just happens naturally. And that's when I know spirit is like really loud at that moment. So fantastic. What a great expression of electromagnetic frequency that you tap into.
It's been brought to my attention. I'm into that other stuff. And Dr. Masaru Emoto, who did Hidden Messages in Water. And as you know, he wanted to see if the molecular structure of water holds thought patterns thought within it. And each and every time he did it, he got the same results. I share the fact to go, if you're doing mediumship or psychic, you're picking up on thought impulses. If you don't have any proactive ways, for me, I've got the etheric, I'm always safe kind of thing. But that kind of a connection, people in this case are afraid to open up. Because of all the movies, all of the things that have been there, there's been such a shift in consciousness when they can see someone who can hold that vibe like you or myself, that it's like, okay, you're not that crazy. And you know what? There's no way you could know that except you know that. And then if we can do this, maybe it's not so scary. Maybe that chills is my indicator, because more than likely, like me, you got to see your mom in action. And you
Yeah.
became very comfortable. But yeah, because I used to do the same thing. No, my mom never knew a stranger. And there would be so many times where people would walk away from her presence crying. And I always thought, do you even know these people? She's like, no. So, in that capacity, it allowed me to get very comfortable with using my abilities because there were a lot of times, for this case, my mom would say something, and 2 hours later, that stuff was happening. And
Yeah.
I was like, are you making that happen? And she shared, no, here's what I'm picking up, and all that kind of stuff. So, it allowed me to be very comfortable in working with these abilities and to be able to fit into this human life experience because you got to blend in the best you can. Now, with your safety tools, do you have an emergency switch? Like if from the other side they need to get a message to a loved one and you're out just doing whatever, how does that work for you?
If a spirit comes through and gives me a really powerful message, then if it's for one of my family members, I'll just pick up the phone and call because they all understand. If it's for a stranger, that's always the really hard part. But I remember I was in Pittsburgh and I was speaking at an event that night, and Rocky and I we walked into the store because we wanted to get water and stuff. We just stocking up on supplies for the hotel room, and there was this young guy. He was probably about 18 or 19, and he had like the t-shirt that was 5 sizes too large and the pants, basically around his knees, what I mean? That type of thing, But he was working there stocking this, and I walked by him, and I kept seeing this older, like grandfather figure saying, "Tell him get his brakes fixed, and I was like, no, I'm not doing this, not doing this, and it was harder and harder. And finally, I said, "Excuse me," I said, "I know this is going to sound really weird." I said, "There's a guy that looks like this who's coming to me." And this kid's looking at me, and his eyes are getting bigger and bigger. And I said, "Does that sound like a grandfather?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, he said, "You have to get your brakes fixed." And he goes, "Oh my God, oh my God." He goes, "Yeah, yeah." He goes, "Like I was freaking out because when I was driving here today, it's like my brakes weren't right and something was vibrating in the car." I go, "You get your brakes fixed." And he's like, "Totally, dude." And he's like getting his phone, and he's calling a garage and making an appointment. But that was one of the incidents where it worked out well. Now there was another one. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because this one. This was right after my mom passed, and of course there's nothing funny about that, but people think when you're a medium, grief somehow bounces off of us. Well, it doesn't.
Right.
And I went to the grief share at a local Catholic church because I was raised in the Catholic faith, and what it was turning out is I was like, well, if your son were here, he may want you to know this. And it was kind of going against what they were doing. And I remember one of the facilitators, she was from Ireland. She goes, "Mark, you can't be doing this. You're seeing spirits." I go, "Catholic Church, angels, saints. I mean, isn't that what we do?" She goes, "Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about." All right, so we finished the session, and there was this woman. She was an older woman, and she was very upset because her mother had died. And I said, "Your mother died." And she looks at me and goes, "You're that medium." I said, "Yes." I go, "Your mother wants me to give you a message. Mediums are not of God. It says so in the book of Deuteronomy." And I said, "All right, that's fine." She goes, "But wait, what does mother want me to know?" Okay. So I gave her this message, and I even talked about this rag doll. It looked kind of like a Raggedy Ann, but it was like a homemade type thing. And she goes, "I made that doll with my mother, and the message, that is something mother would say." She goes, "But what you're doing is evil." I go, "Fine." And I'm walking away. She goes, "But thank you for the lovely message from mother."
Look at what you're saying. That hunger to make that connection overrode her negation.
Yeah.
What's she saying? What's going on?
And the only thing you have to
beautiful.
remember, Mark, is the Witch of Endor in the Bible.
Yes.
And then you just go, boom.
I actually give a whole lecture on Saul and the Witch of Endor.
Oh,
Absolutely.
This is where we get a bad rap. It's in the book of Samuel, and King Saul, he is really having a bad time. David's popularity is rising. David's already slain Goliath, and David's he's a thing. But the Philistines are on the march, and Saul's most trusted advisor, the prophet Samuel, has died. So he goes to the Witch of Endor, like you point out. Now, the Witch of Endor should really be called the Medium of Endor.
Yes.
Because what she does is she facilitates, she brings forth the spirit of the prophet Samuel, and who says to Saul, your time is at an end. And Saul's like, well, that's not the message I wanted. And he says, your time is at an end. So right after that, Saul is defeated in battle. His sons are slain. And then Saul decides to take his own life. Yet David emerges as the king of Judea. Well, the rabbinical community, the rabbis of Judea, this is where we really get a bad rap. See what happens when you talk to those people? Don't talk to those people. You're not supposed to know. You have to go through us and give 10% of your income. Okay, so it turned into this, don't talk to them. But there's another way of looking at that. First off, the spirit of the prophet Samuel did not cause Saul to be defeated. He was merely foreseeing the future, which spirits can do on the electromagnetic level. Secondly, was not David supposed to become the king of the Jews? And according to Scripture, is not Jesus descended from David? So God works in mysterious ways, and the Witch of Endor gets a bad rap when all she did was facilitate communication from Samuel, who said, well, Saul, everybody is a piece of the bigger cosmic puzzle. Your piece has been fit into the puzzle. Now it's time to move on. And so, I mean, I posted something the other day about Joan of Arc, because it was May 30th of 1431 was when Joan of Arc was burned at the stake. And I put something up about how she was put on trial for heresy and dressing like a man. They really got on her about dressing like a man. And Joan of Arc, for those who don't know who she was a teenage girl who started receiving visions from three saints, St. Michael, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret. And this was she was in France. Her hometown was Arc. They were Joan of Arc. I loved on Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the teacher said, so who was Joan of Arc? Noah's wife. So Joan of Arc was not Noah's wife. But so she received these visions that she was to lead France to victory, because at that time, this was during the 100 Years' War, where England was occupying most of France. And you think England and France would have gotten the memo. I mean, they've been, fighting and disagreeing for, forever. But at any rate, she goes to meet with the crown prince, or who they called the Dauphin, I believe he was going to be Charles VII of France. And they sent her away, and then she comes back, and they say, okay. So they bring her into the court, and they have a guy dressed up as the Dauphin, and she looks into the crowd and says, no. He is the Dauphin. And then everyone's like, okay. And after talking to her, they realized she had some mystical powers. The army rallies behind her. She leads the French army to one victory after another. I'm just crystallizing this down. Anyway, the English capture her, put her on trial, convict her of heresy. She tells them they're all a bunch of sinners and horrible. One thing I know about being a lawyer, you don't go in and start insulting the judge, especially the ones that were an extension of the Inquisition.
Yeah.
Anyway, she gets burned at the stake. And the thing is, Joan of Arc exhibited what we now know as psychic and mediumistic abilities. In fact, a lot of saints do. But here's what happened. In the medieval era, if you had joined the clergy, like St. Francis of Assisi, who developed stigmata, which is bleeding from the hands and feet, the wounds that Christ had on the cross, his dear friend St. Anthony of Padua, who was a channeler and could lecture in languages he never studied, and their dear friend St. Clare of Assisi, who was a remote viewer and could see things in real time. She was too sick to leave the convent, but she could see what was happening in church, to the point where she was declared the patron saint of television 800 years later in 1958 by Pope Pius XII. Okay, wow. So when you start examining a lot of the saints, they exhibit what we now call psychic and mediumistic behavior. And with St. Francis, St. Anthony, and St. Clare, they were members of the clergy. So when you're members of the clergy and you get these, you have visions of the Holy Spirit.
And
When
it's
you're
okay.
when you're a peasant girl in France who leads the French army to victory, she's a witch.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
that's why they went after her like that. And then in 1920, the Vatican reversed her convictions, declared her a saint, and now Joan of Arc is Saint Joan of Arc, the patron saint of France and one of the patron saints of the military.
Wow.
So we have existed from day one, and sometimes we're the good guys, sometimes we're the bad guys. And that applies to the Bible. When we're good guys in the Bible, we're prophets. Like Joseph, foretelling the dreams of Pharaoh.
Yep.
Okay? So the Pharaoh of Egypt is having these disturbing dreams that there are 7 fat cows emerging from the Nile River only to be devoured by 7 scrawny cows, 7 healthy ears of corn only devoured by... All right, having this reoccurring dream, can't figure out what it is. None of his viziers, scribes, or magicians or mystics in the court of Pharaoh could do this. So they bring Joseph, who was a Hebrew prisoner who gained a reputation in prison for interpreting dreams. And so Joseph interpreted the dream that there would be 7 years of plenty in Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine. This so impressed Pharaoh that he elevated Joseph to essentially the position of Grand Vizier, second only to Pharaoh, to oversee the storing of grain and food to prepare Egypt for a 7-year famine. Now, the archaeological evidence has pointed to a couple different possible candidates as to who the good Pharaoh can be. And that's one of the projects I'm working on, and that would be the subject of a whole nother show. But the thing is, Joseph was one of the superstars of the Old Testament, but what he was exhibiting was dream interpretation and precognitive ability. In other words, seeing the future.
Both hand in hand, together.
You betcha.
Yes, that is freaking brilliant. Wow, and powerful. But, it's our awareness of a truth as we perceive it is only what we're aware of at the moment. And I just share the fact that Chi, my master guide, is very playful. But it's been said by a gentleman who there's but one constant in the universe, and that is change. And Chi, my master guide, after a while was like, well, Jamie, there could be a few other constants besides certainly change, which is, of course, a constant. But I believe that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So that's a constant. Love is a constant. This is a conscious universe, so consciousness is constant. Your soul's evolution is constant, and there are natural laws. I'm like, geez, there are natural laws that exist in this universe that are constant.
Yeah.
I'm like, I went from my awareness of one that the only one was change until he pointed it out that there could be a few other perspectives about that. And now the science is starting to validate a lot of the spiritual, esoteric energies. We're eternal and other universes and all that. And I always share the fact that I'm not a scientist, not a doctor, nothing. But I believe that they've found that humans are basically energy, vibrational light beings.
Yeah.
And with that definition of being energy in quantum physics, they found that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. But then I say, but wait a minute. That means in a very scientific, quantifiable way that we are eternal and we have always been. And yet we perceive this universe has only been here 14.8 billion years. We may not be from this universe. I'll guarantee you we're not.
Well, what the Hindus say, they don't, according to the Hindus, it's not in the beginning, it is in a beginning. And in Hinduism, eventually the earth will be destroyed, but that's okay because another earth will form and everybody will reincarnate into that dimension. And in fact, it was Nikola Tesla and some other physicists in the early era of quantum mechanics who said they wish they had discovered Hinduism sooner in life, because the way, if you take the mythology out of it and get into the Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the sustainer, Shiva, the destroyer, interestingly enough, God, the Father, the creator, Jesus, the Son, the sustainer, the Holy Spirit, there are parallel concepts which mirror image what you brought up, the second law of thermodynamics, that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. And of all the religions, Hinduism focuses on this eternal cycle and that we never die. It's like what our dear friend and colleague Rhonda Schwartz said, we have but one life and it is eternal.
Yes. And I think that when we can realize that, it'll start to lose the fear of death. Because people come to me and I always playfully say, I never ever talk to the dead. How we perceive death, as I share, is you die in this dimension and then you go to the other side after this. And my thing is, as I always share, one, everything's spiritual. We as humans are extraterrestrials to everyone else. And
Right.
aren't we right now living on the other side of where we come from before here? Does that mean we must have died? Or could it just be a shift in consciousness, vibrational patterns of energy? Because our A-team, there are a number of people who, when they were physically here, in this case as a human, were making major contributions to humanity. And even from the other side, they're still wanting to make these connections.
Yeah.
Communication, science, let's bring it together, make it the practicality so people can fit this in. Because we're moving away from some of the old dogma and opening up to going, okay, maybe there's more to it than what I thought. I didn't realize necessarily that the Jewish faith was into mediumship. And I'm just generalizing, but I believe that they have what they call Seder. And during this, they have the prayers and and what they're sharing. And then in the middle of that, they'll go to the front door and open it. And Elijah, come in and have dinner with isn't that mediumship? Aren't you talking to someone who doesn't have a physical body?
Well, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And people say, well, talking to the dead is wrong. It's like, we pray to Jesus, right?
Yeah, you talk to God, angels, Jesus. You're doing mediumship.
That's different. Okay.
So the same action is being seen a different way. Because I always like to get into the fact of consciously taking your own life or suicide, and how life experience to me only holds the value we place upon it. Because I always share the fact that the act of consciously taking your own life is not always a good thing, because it can certainly be devastating for us here to pick up the pieces and keep going.
Yes.
However, the act of consciously taking your own life is only the experience to get you to the other side. And now I share the fact that here's why I say things only hold the value we place upon it. Because if the act of consciously taking your own life always means you're a bad person, you need to go to someplace bad, my response is, wow, then I guess the person who jumps on that grenade to save the entire platoon's a bad person. For me, I would have respect, appreciation, and gratitude for that person who did the exact action of consciously taking their own life. Yet on one end of the spectrum, they're a hero. On the other end, they're a zero.
Suicide is a very complex behavior. It touches all of us.
Oh, yeah.
We all are affected by someone that we care about who died. And in my book, Evidence of Eternity, that's my second book, it starts on 9/11. And because one of my cousins was in one of the towers when the plane hit.
Yeah.
And I remember looking on TV. My mother called my office. She goes, "Oh my God, there's things falling out of the building." She goes, "Oh, it's people." And I'm like, "What?" Because we couldn't get anything at my law office because all the lines were jammed. And back then we were all using dial-up. We didn't have, it was 2001.
Yeah.
It's amazing how 20 years, when people say dial-up now, nobody uses dial-up now, but back then
800-foot
everybody
cord.
did.
Yep.
And so why did those people jump out of the building? It's because they were faced with the hellish reality of being incinerated, burned alive, which is probably the most excruciatingly painful way to die. So the only alternative was to jump to their death, which is not a great choice, but it would be over quickly and it would be relatively painless. Those people that went to work at the Twin Towers, they didn't plan on suicide. They didn't plan on dying. But they were faced with a hellish reality that was so horrific. The only escape was cessation of consciousness. That is what causes people to die by suicide. In their mind, their reality is so horrific and so horrible that they have firmly come to the conclusion and believe there's only one choice, which is cessation of consciousness. Turn their brain, turn their perception, turn their ability to experience this reality off. And people say, well, it's never that bad. It's like, yes, but you're also not suicidal in that mindset. And the American Psychiatric Association has described it as that. So I find it very difficult to believe a loving and beneficent God is going to condemn someone to hellfire for taking their own life when they are not in their right mind. They feel that there is no other option. And the reason that all the religions, even the normally tolerant Buddhists, come down very heavily on suicide is because how much it hurts everybody. Parents that lose a child, how could she have done this to us? Somebody whose spouse dies by suicide, and it makes people so angry. So the religions do what they do and fear, if you do this, you'll go to hell forever, when that's not the case. I mean, I've like you, Jamie, and Maggie, we've done how many readings for people whose relatives have passed from suicide,
Yep.
and then those spirits come through,
And
I've
atheists.
yet to see anyone smoking and steaming with a pitchfork sticking in their butt.
I've never had that either. That's exactly right. No.
No, but it's still very difficult for people here to understand. My best friend died from suicide, and Billy.
Cool.
We met when we were 11. We went to junior high, high school, college together, and after college, I went to law school, and he went to Asia. And apparently, he had a gift for languages. He learned how to speak Japanese, Cantonese, Thai, Indonesian. I mean, he was amazing.
I could barely speak English.
Well, who knew? And so he invited me to come to Asia, and I know it ticked off my law firm, but it's like, heck with them, It's like I'm taking time off, and we went through all these adventures through Southeast Asia. And even though we were both the same age, we were both raised Catholic. He was Irish Catholic, I was Italian Catholic. He was an atheist, and we had this ongoing discussion. And every time we were in a Buddhist temple, he goes, oh, here he goes again. I'm like talking to the monks and namasteing. And I was like so into it in Japan and Thailand and everywhere else that we were at. And I remember he said, I don't believe in an afterlife, but I don't understand how you do that psychic thing. And plus he knew my parents and they knew him. And one of the best days, let me see if I can get through this without losing it. One of the best days of my life was performing the wedding ceremony for him and his wife, who he met in Japan. And it was here in Florida, and it was at this hotel. It was a beautiful, beautiful spring day. It was overlooking the ocean. Everybody that I loved was there. My parents, his parents, all of our friends from college and high school, all my fraternity brothers. There he was. And I was a notary public in addition to practicing law. So they asked me, would you do this? Like, yeah, And that was, oh God, that was just one of those days where it doesn't really get better than that. When I look at that, it was just a shining star in life. Without getting into all the details, he always grappled with depression and alcoholism. And but we had this ongoing debate about life after death. And he said there's no science, there's no technology that can prove it. So a couple years later, his father was terminally ill with cancer, and his mother was dying from Alzheimer's. And then he got into his father's morphine and overdosed. And his wife called me, and she goes, Mark, and she's very, very Japanese. I mean, she's so honorable and polite. She says, I don't know who to call. I don't know anyone else in this country. The doctors want me to kill him. They want me to take him off life support. I cannot do it. She goes, please, you're the only person. What should I do? And I told her, don't do it. Don't do it. Stick to your guns.
Why?
So I just knew, and here's why. I just knew that she couldn't do it. She would never forgive herself, and she told the doctors no, and he expired on his own 3 hours later. and it spared her that torture.
Yes.
Well, obviously, I'm completely devastated, and so a year and a half later, my first book, Never Letting Go, had come out, and I was speaking at a paranormal convention in Estes Park at the Stanley Hotel, one of the most haunted locations in North America. So all these people from TV were there, and I had just given my talk. It was on, science of spirit communication, and I was down in the conference hall, and I was signing books. And Rocky was walking around, and she was looking at all the K2 meters, the EVP, all the all the electromagnetic energy scanning devices, because a lot of the guys from TV were displaying ghost hunting, paranormal investigating equipment. So she's walking by this table, and there's this guy named Chris, and he was displaying the spirit box. And as she's walking by, she hears, "Get Mark, come out of this thing." And she stops and looks at it, and he said, "Did that just say get Mark?" And she goes, "Yeah." And Chris goes, and then it goes, "Get Mark." And all of a sudden I hear, "Mark, get over here." And I'm looking up, and they're like, "Ah," and all these people are crowding around. So I run over there, go, what? And when I walk up, I hear, "Dude." And I stopped in my tracks, and I looked at Rocky, and a tear was coming down her eyes. And then I hear, "Love you, bro." And she goes, "Mark, that was Billy's voice." We both heard it. And the investigator said, "This is really unusual. First off, it called for Mark specifically. Secondly, both of you positively identified by the voice. It came through that clear." And see, we grew up in the surf culture, and he always called me dude and bro. In fact, here's another one of these. See if I can get through this. The last thing he ever did say to me in this world, he was going to California with his wife and kids, and he hugged me. He goes, "I love you, bro." So then it dawned on me. The atheist who said there's no science or technology to prove this uses a piece of technology to get a message through to me. And I realized I had won that argument. But all joking aside, that got the wheels in my mind turning, and that's what led me on this lifelong mission to help explain the scientific proof of spiritual contact and how that awareness can and will change your life. And that is a big motivating factor to what led me to write my book, The Afterlife Frequency.
Beautiful.
Excellent.
That's such a beautiful story.
Powerful.
Thank you for sharing.
And notice what you're saying. Your friend was multidimensional. Not only are you hearing a voice, he's seeing, go, "Yeah, that one there. Hey." Yeah. And you're like, holy crap, that was specific. What is that? Some of the beginning of our soul phone technology. Because I kind of equate it like right now is Nikola Tesla back in the early 1900s. Back then was saying, irregardless of the distance, you'll be able to see the person right in front of you, and you can put this mechanism in your pocket. And people back then are like, invisible signals, are you crazy? It's got to be plugged into a wall. You need that 800-foot cord that most of us had. And and now we have it. It moved from science fiction to science fact.
Exactly.
And that is the case. That's what we're ready to do, is make those connections. Because once we do, and you're connecting directly with your loved ones, you realize it's just, a button away? Cool, perfect, do it. And it then loses a lot of the fear, because what we don't understand, we do tend to fear. And sometimes when other belief systems will paint it in a certain way, we're like, I'm not supposed to, as you know, I'm not supposed to do this. That's a negative. And it's like, man, what if that's a gift? What if that connection can help other family members? Because, again, the aspect of it can be detrimental for people, but I also share the fact that, but that one person's act of consciously taking their own life helped 15 other families have their loved ones come home to them. And what was a tragedy was really a triumph in this way. And it's kind of, the way that we see things. And when we can realize that, it's just a label, a way of seeing things, that there can be other ways, then it'll kind of loosen the sting of the religious aspect and more of the openness to go, okay, maybe that's spiritual stuff. Maybe that's allowing everything to be. Because, our gift is when our loved ones are coming to us, they want us to know that they're great. Because your friend's like, I'm just in the next world. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And if an atheist from the other side can be like, hey, I'm going to work with electromagnetic frequencies through my electromagnetic soul to your electromagnetic soul, and I can orchestrate this because look, they're playing with all the equipment in the right place, the right time. What a beautiful confirmation.
It just, and I was laughing because he was one of the funniest people. He just had such a great sense of humor. There's our biological family, and there's my chosen family, and he was my chosen brother. It's just,
I love that.
You meet when you're 11. I mean, how many friends do you get like that in life? One,
And great,
two, if you're lucky.
he feels the same about you like you do for him. And that's beautiful. That's genuine. That's going, okay, you're not putting on airs. It's not everything's great for you. It's you've learned to heal yourself in some way. You've lost loved ones. And when they can see it's okay to make those connections and then it can be life-changing, we begin to live that life, not just exist. And I think that your friend is playing an intricate part because this is some of the technology. This is just one facet of the communication aspect. There are so many more that are going to be rolling out as the time moves along as we perceive it. But it's that kind that humanity is now ready. It's at the tipping point of consciousness, 51%. And with the empowerment of love and compassion, that's when it gets real.
Well, and didn't Jesus tell us you must love others as you love yourself?
I will just share just my experience, and it happened a little while ago. I always seem to just be sitting there, and like, bip, that quickly, I became everybody I ever interacted with. I felt every single energy exchange, and poop, come back to me with, how'd you treat yourself? I'm like, oh my God, that stuff's real. It moves from the airy-fairy to you're so connected to, holy cow. And I don't understand it because that quick, but it gave me the infusion of understanding. I felt every connection. There was no gap, nothing. Have you, in your own experiences, ever connected with the oneness?
Oh,
for me,
yes. Yeah, I call the other side, the afterlife frequency, but I refer to the collective consciousness. And Edgar Casey used to refer to this as the universal mind. Progressive and spiritual Christianity refers to it as the Christ consciousness, Hinduism as Krishna consciousness. And the way I describe it as when we die, our electromagnetic soul, think of it as a drop of water which leaves and plunges into this eternal sea of souls, ocean of souls. People will ask me like, well, where are they? What are they doing during a reading? And spirits always wait till the very end of the reading. And I now know why they do this. And on a number of occasions, they have allowed me to feel what it is like to be them. And I can only handle it for about maybe 5 seconds. And I like to analogize it to I'm a single wire suddenly channeling all of the electricity going through Manhattan. It just boom. And what it feels like is I'm connected to everything everywhere, and physically it's like going into a pool or the ocean when the water's that perfect warm temperature and you're underneath the surface and you can't feel your body, its weight, any pressure, any pain. It's this perfect
just being,
but it's so intense. After 5 seconds, I'm wiped. And spirits understand that it's going to do that to me, and thankfully they always save it to like the last thing, because if I started the reading like that, I'm just going to be wiped out, because mediumship takes a lot out of you.
It can, yes.
You got to be very careful how many hours you do a day, because you're putting a tremendous drain on your body, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. My mother always told me, don't use your energy, use the white light. Use the white light. Because some people, like, they get all into, I got to use my own energy, and it just burns you out. Now, even though you're using the infinite energy, there's still a lot of information and a lot of electromagnetic waves going through your body, and it can wear you down. The way I like to describe it is our ability is like a battery, and it wears down, and then it needs to be replenished.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, if you want to check out this book, which you do want to check out the book Afterlife Frequency, please visit Mark's website at afterlifefrequency.com. We'll have a link in the show notes for that. And Mark, thank you so much for all
Thanks,
that you
Rhoda.
shared with us today. It was beautiful getting to know you and exploring electromagnetic souls with you. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. And Maggie and Jamie, thank you for having me on. And for all the listeners, please keep tuning in to Psychic Evolution. I'm Mark Anthony, and I'll see you next time.
Beautiful. Excellent. That's perfect.